Very rarely is there ever a player or team that seemingly comes out of nowhere and takes the country by storm. Yet Jimmer Fredette and the 2010-2011 BYU Cougars were able to do just that, but also in a season where seemingly everything went right and a team that seemed destined to go where no other team had gone before it ultimately ended in what could have been. And just so we know what we're dealing with here and what this team meant to the fan base at the time, BYU basketball to this day holds the record for most tournament appearances without a Final Four, the definition of consistently good but never great. Not since Danny Ainge went coast to coast to beat Notre Dame back in 1981 had the Cougars sniffed a shot of making the Final Four, only to get stomped by Virginia in the next round in the Elite Eight. But all of that was supposed to change with Jimmer Fredette. So Jimmer came from the small town of Glens Falls, New York, a long ways from Provo, Utah. And he was a decorated high school player. He still ranks as the 11th highest scorer in New York high school history, though he still didn't garner much national recruiting attention, mostly due to coming from a small town. Nearby Syracuse was well aware of Jimmer in high school, but had already committed to signing a couple high-profile guards in his same class, those being Johnny Flynn and Scoop Jardine. But BYU recruited Jimmer pretty hard, regularly flying across country to see his games. It also helped that his dad converted to the LDS church, and his sister had graduated from BYU and already made Utah her home. Plus, BYU was really the only higher-profile team recruiting Jimmer at the time, and it ended up being a match made in heaven. And at BYU, Jimmer really put himself on the map his junior year, shooting 44% from three and averaging 22 points a game, and during the season dropping 49 points on Arizona in Tucson, which is a McHale Center record to this day. He also put up 37 points against a 10-seed Florida in the first round of the tournament, giving BYU its first NCAA tournament win in 17 years. And it got to the point where Fredette was seriously considering foregoing his senior year and just declaring for the NBA draft. The head coach, Dave Rose, and staff did everything in their power to get Jimmer to stay for one more year.
You're on track to be the winningest basketball player in the history of BYU. But you got to do one thing.
What's that?
You got to come back and play.
So Jimmer elected to stay for his senior year because he knew that the players that BYU would be bringing back had the chance to be really good. But in order to be great, he would have to be the centerpiece of the team. And now with him coming back, BYU would have one of the most experienced backcourts in the country with fellow senior Jackson Emery. And Jackson really was the emotional leader of the team. He was hustling for rebounds, disrupting passing lanes, diving for loose balls on defense, but could also hit the big shots on the other end when needed. And sophomore Brandon Davies was the rock down low in the post, leading the team in rebounds, blocks, and running the court well with a team that loved to play fast. And throw in Noah Hartsock and Charles Abuo, who were solid contributors every single night. All these pieces started falling into place, and it really seemed like the stars were aligning for a special season. And really nothing could go wrong for BYU to start the year. The Cougars ran through the beginning of their schedule going 9-0. Fredette was averaging close to 24 points per game, and the team was coming off a nice feel-good win in Jimmer's hometown of Glens Falls against a tough Vermont team. And they were set with a rematch against Arizona back in Salt Lake City. And this would be where Jimmer Mania really took hold. Jimmer scored 33 points, grabbed 9 rebounds in an 87-65 win. And in a quote from Coach Sean Miller, BYU is one of the elite programs in the country, and they showed that tonight. Mind you, this Arizona team went on to win the Pac-12 and advance to the Elite Eight themselves. This was a massive win for the team and one that put them in the national spotlight. However, quickly the Cougs would come back to reality with a slip-up against UCLA in the very next game. But the team would rebound quickly and rattle off another 9 wins in a row, including a win at UNLV, something they hadn't done since 2005. Also a 104-79 victory over their rival Utah, where Fredette would score 47 points, including this one at the buzzer.
From 40 feet! Got it! He got it! Maybe the greatest half of basketball ever.
Now at this point, the Cougars were ranked 9th in the country, and next up was a meeting against undefeated number 4 in the country, San Diego State, led by a 4-headed monster of Malcolm Thomas, DJ Gay, Billy White, and the Claw himself, Kawhi Leonard. And a sold-out Marriott Center of nearly 23,000 were hyped and ready for the Aztecs. Students were outside camping in the snow for a whole week just to get a seat for this show.
Undefeated San Diego State, once beaten BYU on the CBS College Sports Network. Expect anything on this one night. The Marriott Center on the BYU campus, 22,700 packed for the biggest game in the history of this building, in the history of the Mountain West Conference. It is an incredible scene. The noise is deafening, Steve, to think the Mountain West Conference after 12 years has gotten to this night.
Well, not only a proud night for the Mountain West Conference, but what about these two schools who are certainly national contenders?
And the matchup was close throughout. It was back and forth for most of the first half. In the end, a hard-fought, physical game that ended up seeing the Cougars outlast the Aztecs 71-58. Jimmer put up another beauty of 43 points, and Kawhi Leonard ended the game with 22 points of his own and 15 rebounds. And this would not be the last we see of these two. However, 3 days later, the Cougs would have another letdown after a big win, losing on the road at the Pit against the New Mexico Lobos. And this was disappointing for the team, no doubt, but still one of the toughest places to get a dub in college basketball. But after that loss, the team made light work of the rest of the conference, leading up to the rematch on the road against San Diego State. One of the biggest matchups in both programs' history. Number 7 BYU versus number 6 San Diego State. And Viejas was rocking. The student section was dressed up as Mormon missionaries. It was a nationally televised game that really could only be described as electric. And really leading up to the game, everyone figured San Diego State was going to get this win. They were at home in a hostile environment and no way BYU was going to beat them twice. There were massive boos from the crowd every time Jimmer would touch the ball, and roaring cheers every time he missed. And despite all that, the Cougs held a lead throughout the first half, and San Diego State did storm back to bring the lead within 3 at halftime. Then with about 13 minutes left in the game, Jimmer hit this shot, and it was pretty much all over from there. And even though Jimmer still put up 25 points in this game, this was an all-around team effort, one of the best played games by the Cougars all year. Also, just to put into perspective how good this San Diego State team was, had it not been for these 2 losses against a healthy BYU squad, they would have gone 34-0 in the regular season. This team was elite, and Jimmer Fredette and the Cougars beat them twice. And this was a quote from their head coach Steve Fisher after the game. "I told our team BYU is Final Four good." After that game, it had to be the peak of the hype for BYU basketball.
A frenetic frenzy, a Jimmer frenzy.
He's a point guard for the 7th-ranked BYU Cougars. He's averaging better than 27 points per game this season.
Nights like this, I think last year 49 in the McHale Center at Arizona, one of the great performances certainly that they've seen in that building ever. What is it like when everything you're throwing up, including that buzzer beater at halftime, just finds the bottom and it looks like it's so easy? What's that like?
Jimmer was the front runner for Player of the Year. The team was being projected by dozens of analysts to be a number 1 seed in the tournament. Truly, these Cougars were experiencing levels of success never thought possible in Provo, and it seemed nothing could stop this hype train rolling all the way to the Final Four. That was until...
We begin today with Brigham Young University. On the verge of getting its first number 1 seed ever, the school announced today that it has suspended forward Brandon Davies.
Suspended their starting forward Brandon Davies for the remainder of the season after they violated the school's honor code.
The team's 3rd leading scorer dismissed for the rest of the season. How big a blow is this for the Cougars?
I think it really hurts. I think anytime you're gonna be successful in the NCAA tournament, you've got to be able to score in the post and guard in the post. It's a huge blow to BYU and their chances in the NCAA tournament. Players play and tough players win. And we'll find out how tough BYU is going forward.
Everyone in the community was crushed. The players, the fans. I mean, Brandon Davies was a local kid from Provo High, a fan favorite, and he was having a massive sophomore year for the Cougars. It was going to be a major loss to the front court of the team, a presence they would sorely miss the rest of the season and the NCAA tournament. And following the Brandon Davies suspension, BYU was handed one of the worst losses of the season, at home against New Mexico, 82-64. No doubt a result of a massive hole down low in the post and also one in the locker room. But the Cougars would finish the season strong, claiming a regular season conference title before finally getting beaten down by the Aztecs in the conference tournament championship game. Now, was that due to a motivated Aztec team or a depleted and heartbroken BYU roster? Maybe a little of both, but the season wasn't over and BYU would have to play on regardless of the circumstances. And they would enter March Madness play as a 3rd seed, and this would actually be tied for the highest seed in program history. And at the start of the tournament, they would survive an 8-point win against Wofford in the first round and absolutely smacking the Gonzaga Bulldogs in the second. Jimmer would rain down 34 points and give us this iconic shot. And some could argue that that loss made Gonzaga who they are today, but that could be for another video. And for a second there, it looked like Jimmer might be able to will BYU to the promised land even without Davies.
Here comes Jimmer. Long range!
but the 2 seed Florida Gators would prove to be too much in the Sweet 16 matchup. Summed up best here in the game recap. BYU had the best score, Florida had the best team. A balanced attack from the Gators put the game away in overtime. BYU really had no answer down low for Alex Tyus, and Kenny Boynton was glued to Jimmer all night. It was clear BYU really didn't have much left in the tank in overtime, and that was it. 83-74. The magical season and Jimmer mania was over. But what makes this Sweet 16 loss hurt even more for BYU fans is the fact that on paper, Florida would have been their toughest matchup of the tournament. The path really was laid out for a Final Four at least. It would have been an Elite 8 matchup with a tough Butler team, led by Shelvin Mack and head coach Brad Stevens, which that team actually beat Florida in overtime 74-71. But that would have led to a Final Four matchup against 11 seed VCU, who was hot as could be at the time, but no doubt a dream scenario for any 3 seed in the tournament. And I'm not arguing that BYU wins this game outright, but the matchup alone would have been historic. 2 3 seeds, led by the 2 frontrunners for the Naismith Award that year, Jimmer Fredette and Kemba Walker. I mean, come on. But ultimately, in this universe, it wasn't meant to be. And sadly, we'll never know how far that 2010-2011 team could have gone with Davies on the floor. And if we're really being honest, I mean, injuries, suspensions, all that kind of stuff, it's just part of the game. By the end of the season, every team is dealing with it to a certain extent. So it's really not helpful to dwell on it for too long, but at the same time, it's still fun to think about what could have been. Thank you guys for watching. Peace.